Real-Time 1960s presents Evening Report, a complete roundup of today's news with Joe Rubenstein.
Good evening. In Indianapolis, a massive explosion kills at least 62 people. In Philadelphia, President Kennedy is met by protesters. In South Vietnam, 3 Americans are captured. Demonstrators assault Chief Justice Warren. Madam New is snubbed by Hollywood. And Sandy Koufax wins another award. Those are the headlines. The details after this message.
March, here's the sweatshirt you loaned Jimmy the day it turned so cold. You needn't have bothered, it's so old. Why, it's perfectly all right. How'd you get it so bright? With Bold, the new detergent Bold.
Now, Millie, don't be silly. No detergent makes clothes bright.
Bold does. Better than clean, better than white, all the way to bright. These power granules are new.
Why, they're green and white and blue. Okay, prove to me what Bold can do. Well, what do you know? They almost glow, they're bright. You get whiter white, bluer blue, checkier checks, and blacker blacks too. I thought I was wise, but I can see with my eyes the difference is like day and night. What goes in Bold comes out bright. I'm sold on Bold.
At a Democratic fundraising dinner at Philadelphia's Bellevue Stratford Hotel last night, President Kennedy spoke out forcefully on a number of topics. The president's reception in the city was somewhat stormier than usual. As his motorcade approached the hotel, demonstrators from the Congress of Racial Equality, the Student Peace Union, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and the International Christian Youth all tried to attract the president's attention. The Peace Union group, which included students from the University of Pennsylvania and Haverford College, was protesting the administration's support of the Diem regime in South Vietnam. Their placards read, "Why die for a dictator?" and "All hands off Vietnam." Supporters of Republican Senator Barry Goldwater were also among the demonstrators. As the civil rights protesters sang "We Shall Overcome," the Goldwater supporters shouted, "Give to the Kennedy Retirement Fund." The president had no reaction to the protesters, and his reception inside the hall was considerably warmer. Toward the end of his speech, the president touched on civil rights.
While our gains in this area have been considerable in education, in employment, in voting, in transportation, in housing, and public accommodation, that issue is still very much with us. And it will continue to be with us until all Americans of every race can regard one another with the quality for which this city is noted, brotherly love.
The president said that civil rights should not be a partisan issue.
And with equal support from the Republicans as well as the Democrats, we are putting forward legislation which is strong, just, effective, and reasonable to secure for all Americans the rights and opportunities that they deserve.
Afterward, a bubble top was placed on the presidential limousine, and the motorcade traveled back to the airport, where Mr. Kennedy spoke with some 75 supporters and shook hands with each of the 22 highway patrolmen who had provided his escort. Before boarding the plane, the president turned to Mayor James Tate and said, quote, "Jim, I wish you luck. I'll see you at the Army-Navy game," unquote. Mayor Tate, a Democrat, is running for re-election next Tuesday in Philadelphia. The Army-Navy football game is scheduled for November 30th at Philadelphia's Municipal Stadium. In Indianapolis tonight, at least 62 persons were killed and hundreds injured as the result of an explosion at the Indiana State Fairgrounds Coliseum during a performance of the Holiday on Ice review. Fire Chief William Lynch said 62 bodies had been removed from the shattered building, and state police said there may be as many as 20 more dead. Many of the victims were children. A fire department inspector on the scene was asked if all the dead and injured were out of the building.
All the injured are, but we still have quite a few dead here.
But there's no one in any rubble or trapped in any way?
No, they're all laid out here. This is a temporary morgue we set up.
He was asked if he could confirm reports that the Coliseum building had been designed to prevent such explosions.
Well, I don't know anything about the structure of the building, whether it was designed with anything like that in mind or not, but at least we had it, and it was a dandy, too.
Robert Young, assistant manager of the Coliseum, reported, quote, "I was about to go out the door when I heard a terrible explosion. I flew through the air and almost did a swan dive on the hood of a car 30 feet out in the parking lot. You have to be hurt, Bob, I told myself, but I stood up and realized I was all right. I rushed back in and immediately realized it was terrible," unquote. Mr. Young, who seemed to be in a state of shock as he spoke, continued, quote, "I always thought I was a hero. I pulled a pilot out of a plane during the war, and he had an arm off. But I couldn't take this. I carried out 4 or 5 bodies with blankets over them, but when they ran out of blankets, I just couldn't take any more. Just thank God it wasn't a Saturday or a Sunday. There would have been hundreds of kids in there," unquote. In South Vietnam yesterday, 3 U.S. military advisors were captured by the Viet Cong during a battle between the guerrillas and a South Vietnamese company south of the Mekong River Delta. There were 2 reports from villagers in the area who, after the battle, had seen 3 Americans walking along with their hands tied behind their backs. The communist attack fell on the left flank of a 300-man task force that had been probing the communist-infested area of rice paddies, canals, and jungle. Said one U.S. officer, quote, "The day ended with the enemy in command of the field. He had plenty of time to get his own casualties out of the way, along with the prisoners from our side, before we could go back in," unquote. In Washington, the Army identified the captured men as Captain Humbert Versace of Baltimore, First Lieutenant James Rowe of McAllen, Texas, and Sergeant Daniel Pitzer of Spring Lake, North Carolina. Major General Richard Stilwell, operations officer for U.S. forces in Vietnam, said everything possible was being done to recover the 3 Americans. At today's press conference, President Kennedy was asked about a possible withdrawal of troops from Southeast Asia.
Well, as you know, when Secretary McNamara and General Taylor came back, they announced that we would expect to withdraw 1,000 men from South Vietnam before the end of the year. And there's been some reference to that by General Hawkins. If we're able to do that, that will be our schedule. I think the first unit, the first contingent, would be 250 men who are not involved in what might be called frontline operations. It would be our hope to lessen the number of Americans there by 1,000 as the training intensifies and is carried on in South Vietnam.
On a separate topic, the president gave a short but direct answer to a question about Vice President Johnson.
In spite of something you said here in May 1962, there's talk that Lyndon Johnson will be dumped next year. Senator Thruston Morton used the word purge. Now, sir, assuming that you run next year, would you want Lyndon Johnson on the ticket? And do you expect that he will be on the ticket?
Yes, to both of those questions. That's correct. Yes.
The speculation about Vice President Johnson's future apparently derived from the view that his strong position on civil rights since he became vice president had hurt his popularity in states he had helped President Kennedy win in 1960. However, even if the president were to write off the Deep South in 1964, his scheduled 2-day swing through Texas next month is testament to the fact that he has no intention of writing off that state's 25 electoral votes. Vice President Johnson, a Texan, will join President Kennedy on that trip. I'll have more news for you after this message.
Bye, Mom. Come back soon, huh?
Well, you did it again.
I did what again?
Every single time. You know, you always agree with your mother instead of with me. Look, I bought you this Head & Shoulders shampoo. What happens? Your mother says, "Oh, those dandruff shampoos don't really work." And you just nod your head.
Well, they don't. I've tried them.
This one works. I know it.
Head & Shoulders helps control tempers, dandruff, with just regular use. It really works.
Here again, Joe Rubenstein.
In New York City Tuesday night, shouting demonstrators hurled placards and leaflets at Chief Justice Earl Warren as he left the New York City Bar Association building on West 44th Street. Justice Warren, 72 years old, had just been made an honorary member of the association. A gathering of roughly 75 pickets had paraded in front of the building for 2 hours, shouting, "Impeach Earl Warren." Walter Zaleski of Brooklyn, who identified himself as a spokesman for the demonstrators, charged that many of the Supreme Court's decisions had, quote, eroded our freedoms, unquote. Mr. Zaleski denied any affiliation with the right-wing John Birch Society, but the leaflets thrown at Justice Warren encouraged the purchase of anti-Supreme Court publications obtainable from American Opinion in Belmont, Massachusetts. American Opinion is a publication affiliated with the John Birch Society, and the organization's president, Robert Welch, is listed as its editor. The impeachment of Justice Warren has long been a goal of the John Birch Society. The incident in New York came on the heels of a similar one in Dallas, Texas last week, where Adlai Stevenson, U.S. ambassador to the UN, was shoved, spat upon, and hit on the head with a picket sign after delivering a speech at the Dallas Municipal Auditorium in honor of United Nations Day. The president of the Dallas UN Association described the incident as, quote, a concerted action by members of Edwin Walker's following and the John Birchers, unquote. Mr. Walker, a former major general now living in Dallas, was forced to resign from the Army in 1961 after reports that he was indoctrinating troops in West Germany using reading materials from the John Birch Society. On Friday, 100 Dallas city leaders apologized to Mr. Stevenson via telegram, stating that the city was, quote, outraged and abjectly ashamed of the disgraceful discourtesies you suffered at the hands of a small group of extremists, unquote. A copy of the telegram was sent to President Kennedy, who plans to visit Dallas next month during his swing through Texas. Texas Governor John Connally also criticized the perpetrators, calling their actions, quote, an affront to common courtesy and decency, unquote. This afternoon, Governor Connally announced plans for a Texas welcome dinner for President Kennedy and Vice President Johnson. He said the $100-a-plate dinner, sponsored by the State Democratic Executive Committee, would be held at Austin's Municipal Auditorium at 7:30 p.m. on November 22nd. Madame Ngo Dinh Nhu, the controversial First Lady of South Vietnam, who is currently on a speaking tour of this country, arrived in Los Angeles Tuesday and learned that her request to visit the Warner Brothers studio set of the film My Fair Lady had been rejected. When it was reported that Madame Nhu wished to visit the set, the film's star, Audrey Hepburn, was heard to say, quote, if she comes, I won't be here. I'm sorry, but I'll be ill, unquote. Earlier this week, Madame Nhu drew hisses during a speech at the University of California at Berkeley when she spoke of the alleged religious tolerance of the Diem regime. After the Berkeley speech, Madame Nhu told newsmen the hissing students had, quote, behaved like snakes, unquote. In the same interview, she charged that reports of a secret police force in South Vietnam were, quote, absolutely an invention, unquote. Numerous reliable sources have indicated that South Vietnam's secret police force is run by her husband, Ngo Dinh Nhu. At the San Francisco hotel where she was staying, Madame Nhu was met by a large group of protesters, among them 66-year-old attorney Vincent Hallinan. Mr. Hallinan, who ran for president in 1952 on the Progressive Party ticket, was asked for his reaction to Madame Nhu's visit to the United States.
Well, I think it's about the same fascination that you'd have if a poisonous snake dropped into your midst.
He was asked if he thought anything constructive could come from her visit.
No, I hope that something destructive comes from, in other words, a destruction of the American foreign policy that maintains torturers and murderers and subsidizes people like Madame Nhu's family.
Madame Nhu evaded the protesters by entering the hotel through a side door under armed guard. Sports, right after this.
Hello, this is Jack Benny. Now, people think I like to count my money, but what I like to do is make it count. And I found a way that makes money really count for everybody. It's the way the Salvation Army is organized to make full use of your contributions to their Christmas and winter welfare fund. And they're experienced at doing it for even more years than I've been 39. At Christmas, the Salvation Army uses your donations to bring cheer and comfort to those who would have known no cheer. Toys and bright hope for children who thought Christmas presents were for somebody else. You can help with your contributions on the street corner or in your home simply by mailing your check to the Salvation Army in your city. It's the only way I know to say Merry Christmas to so many people.
Yesterday, Sandy Koufax, 27-year-old southpaw ace of the champion Los Angeles Dodgers, was named the National League's most valuable player. Koufax, who had already won the Cy Young Award, thus became the second pitcher to win both awards in the same year. Right-hander Don Newcomb did it with the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1956, the year the Cy Young Award was introduced. Koufax's two stunning victories over the Yankees in the World Series, the first of which featured a series record-breaking 15 strikeouts, did not influence the voting, since all the ballots were cast before the series began. In a recent interview, Koufax was asked when he had started playing baseball.
Well, I started when I was very young. I never played in any organized baseball, I guess, until almost in high school. I think I played 1 or 2 years of sandlot baseball in New York when I went to school. And I went to high school and played there, and I played in college 1 year before I signed with the Dodgers.
Turning to technical matters, Koufax was asked how a pitcher should approach a batter when he is seeking a double play.
Well, to make a man hit a double play, you first have to make him hit it on the ground. And depending on what kind of stuff you have, a pitcher with a sinking fastball might throw in a fastball. If your fastball is the kind that rises or maybe runs on the hitter, you'd probably go with your curveball. You try and throw him something that's moving or breaking it down. It's a little harder for him to hit it into the air than possibly the fastball that's moving up a little bit.
And finally tonight, American Football League Commissioner Joe Foss said this week that attendance at AFL games this year was substantially ahead of last year. Foss said the league would not expand, however, until all 8 clubs were on solid financial ground. He also predicted that within 3 or 4 years, the AFL and NFL champion teams would meet in a playoff game, stating, quote, "Everyone in professional sports is in it for the dollar. If anything would give the game a boost, it would be a playoff game. It would be the greatest television package for a single game. Some would come just to see us get killed. I happen to know that the players in both leagues favor it," unquote. NFL Commissioner Pete Rozelle, however, refused to elaborate on a terse statement issued by his office that said, quote, "We have no plans for such a game," unquote. And that, for this evening, completes our look at the latest news on this Thursday, October 31st, 1963. Thank you for joining us, and have a great day tomorrow.
This has been your Evening Report, a roundup of the latest news with Joe Rubenstein.